Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Salisbury Township, Pennsylvania, February 26, 1995. Those who knew 48-year-old Brenda Freeman described her as a soft-spoken and devoutly religious woman. Those who knew her also said that she was terrified of her two oldest sons. The boys, Brian, age 17, and David, age 15, were described as hulking. Both of them were over 6 feet, and one of them weighed 245 pounds even as a teenager. These two boys also got heavy into the white supremacist movement, specifically neo-Nazi subculture. They had both shaved their heads and taken to wearing military-style uniforms, and they also got tattoos on their foreheads. One of them's tattoos said Sieg Heil, and the other one said Berserker. They were only teenagers, but they had already been in and out of institutions for drug and alcohol problems. Miss Freeman had been telephoning counselors and psychologists to ask for advice, and she even managed to bring the rebellious brothers to a few anti-skinhead education sessions run by the local police department in her hometown. Frankly, I'm shocked that the sensitivity training that she had her sons go to didn't change them at all, and it was conducted by the police, so it's doubly surprising that it had no effect. Of course, I'm being sarcastic. Trying to take these two little demons to some sort of treatment, that was Miss Freeman's first mistake. She didn't understand a white supremacist cannot be rehabilitated or reformed. They can only be punished. And when you consider the sheer number of white supremacists in the police department, if anything, she was probably bringing them right back into contact with the very racist thugs who had recruited them into the neo-Nazis in the first place. A local regional director of the ADL at the time had been contacted by Miss Freeman. He said she was desperate. She made it clear that she was waiting for a calamity to occur. It was just a matter of time. Tragically, it wouldn't be long. The night of the murders, Miss Freeman had gotten into an argument with Brian and Daniel about one of their cousins being brought to the house. Brian grabbed his mother, forced a pair of shorts into her mouth to silence her, and he then repeatedly stabbed her to death with a steak knife. But they were only beginning their kill spree. They then beat their own father, Dennis Freeman, to death with a metal exercise bar and an aluminum baseball bat. And then they murdered their own 11-year-old brother as he lay sleeping in bed. They hit him repeatedly with a 3-foot pickaxe handle. Brian and David then stole their mother's 1988 Pontiac convertible and fled the scene. The brothers were arrested at a farmhouse about 120 miles northwest of Detroit several hours after a trucker noticed them driving in Ohio. The brothers were charged with 3 counts each of homicide and conspiracy to commit homicide. Arrested alongside the Freeman brothers was their cousin, Nelson Birdwell, and an unidentified Michigan man. As news of this heinous triple murder spread throughout the little township, the neighbors gave statements to the white media. The neighbors were disgusted. They were horrified. But none of them was shocked. As one woman who lived across the street from the Freeman home said, everybody around here knew the parents were being threatened by the boys. This neighbor refused to give her name out of fear of the teenagers. Even after they were already behind bars, she was still scared of them. Yeah, because she knows that genetic immunity from law is real, and that the chances of them being acquitted was even money, and that if they got out, nothing was going to stop them from coming after her because racial privilege is the totality of the law. The neighbors had also said that the brothers had threatened the parents on many occasions, threatening to kill them, especially recently after the parents refused to let them use the family car. Well, it seems they found a way to get their hands on the car keys regardless. Now, this was back in 1995, 30 years ago. Why bring it up now? Because back in the 1990s, when they committed this massacre, they were both sentenced to life in prison. No problems there. They committed a man-sized crime. They should suffer man-sized consequences. They've been behind bars for the last 30 years. But a recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling barred life without parole terms for juveniles. They didn't do it for black juveniles, that's for sure. This ruling has resulted in resentencing hearings in cases like the Freemans. A judge evaluating the Freemans' case has now resentenced these two monsters and reduced their sentences to 60 years to life, so what that means is they'll both be in their 70s when they're eligible for parole. Bryan Freeman claims to have discovered religion while he was in prison, but the crimes of these two inspired copycats. The day after the Freeman brothers were captured, another teenager from their area, 17-year-old Jeffrey Howarth, shot and killed both his parents. Apparently, he was inspired by the Freeman brothers. Howarth was put on trial, and of course his genetic immunity from law saved him. He was acquitted by reason of insanity and sent to a mental institution. Now, it's unknown whether this Howarth character was also a neo-Nazi, but he was certainly inspired by two of them. So once again, as we've seen so many times before, whenever these mass murders happen, they're always in these tiny little hamlets. Salisbury Township had a population of about 13,600 back in 1995 when the Freeman brothers committed their massacre. Today, that number has actually gone down a couple hundred. So these small towns are breeding grounds for psychos and for mass murders, but the white media just doesn't report on that. Gotta keep up appearances, don't you know? And that's why these massacres keep happening. America doesn't have a gun control problem, it has a white supremacist control problem. It has a racial privilege control problem. But unfortunately, under white supremacy, they see their racial privilege not as a problem, but as a solution. Because if this case sounds familiar, it should. You had Ethan Crumbley, who was from Michigan, and his parents bought him a gun. His teachers reported him for his disturbing behavior, including using his cell phone to shop for ammunition in the middle of class. His parents were told about all this. They even came up to the school, but of course they did nothing, and naturally neither did the school administrators. Now, if Ethan Crumbley had been black and merely had a hairstyle that the white teachers didn't like, then he would have been kicked out of school that day immediately. They wouldn't have waited to see what his parents had to say about it. That's why this keeps happening, and it's been going on a very, very long time. This is an American tradition where they will sacrifice themselves before they do anything that even remotely encroaches on their freedom of movement or anything that they may wish to do, including to kill. But this isn't the only case I wanted to comment on today. Back in 2022, I posted a crime report about Nathan Carman. Carman, you'll recall, was on a sailing trip with his mother on their little boat called the Chicken Pox. While out to sea, the boat, which had previously not had any real problems, mysteriously sank. A week later, Nathan Carman was found floating on a life raft by the Coast Guard, but his mother was never found at all. Carman denied any wrongdoing, but the cops didn't buy it, mainly because his story was fishy as hell, no pun intended. But they also didn't buy it because this wasn't the first time that a family member of Nathan Carman's had died under mysterious circumstances. His grandfather, who was a wealthy multimillionaire, also died after Nathan Carman came to pay him a visit. If you want the full skinny on that one, you can find that video in the archives of this channel. Nathan Carman committed suicide last year while awaiting trial for killing his mother. But like the Freeman brothers, we haven't heard the last of this creep either, because now Netflix wants to make a documentary about him as part of their true crime series. And this is also part of how the white media feeds these massacres and encourages them, because these little monsters have in the back of their empty heads the idea that if nothing else, even if they get caught, they're going to be famous and people are going to know who they are. The white media glamorizes and glorifies these creatures. That's why we keep getting more and more of this behavior. The white media plays up these punks as if they were some perverted version of lifestyles of the rich and infamous. These suburban psychos grow up with privilege, allowed to do whatever they want. They have no hardships. They have everything they want in life, and no reason to be unhappy, much less angry about anything. And yet, they're the main ones taking guns to school, or the mall, or movie theaters, or a church and slaughtering people, or as we saw in Pike County, just bludgeoning people to death, killing people, just stabbing them, it doesn't matter. They're the main ones who routinely kill their entire families, but neither Netflix nor any of these other white media outlets will do any deep dive about how racial privilege causes the affluent to think murder is also part of their privilege. They instead turn it into just more infotainment. These suburban psychos always get their images rehabilitated by the white media. See, when black people kill, it's because they're just some crazy niggers, and that's just how those people are. On the other hand, if a white suspect kills someone, they become mythologized and turned into some sort of dark genius. Whether it's Charles Manson, Ted Bundy, the Unabomber, Jeffrey Dahmer, or the Zodiac Killer. The white media treats these creeps as some sort of twisted wish fulfillment for straight-laced audiences who might wish that they could do some of the stuff they see these guys doing. But in too many cases, like with that Howarth individual, a lot of them act out these fantasies that they've seen, and since the society still protects and coddles these killers as well as hides their crimes from public view and celebrates them in the white media, their bloodbaths will only continue. I, for one, can only wonder when Netflix will finally get around to doing a series about the Freeman brothers. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Ronrico Foster, Ava Brown, Richard Allen Lovell, Eve, and Janitha Blue. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.